Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72. In a galaxy far, far away, you were all asked to like and subscribe. And then Master Yoda showed up and he told you, subscribe, you will. Now, beyond all of this is just me having a little bit of fun in the intro. So let's go into the actual video today. I'm actually going to make reference to the pop culture where most of our game comes from. Now, you might be disagreeing with a lot of what I'm saying, but it is very general in what I'm talking about right now that these relations are being made. Now, for the start, when it comes to certain factions and aspects of the factions, they actually link up to major key civilizations in acts of sci-fi. Example, Minmata and Ama are actually replicas of alien civilizations from a show called Stargate. Now, there's a lot of references from Stargate within the game, and I will go through a few of them for you as we're going into this video. Now, let's first start off with our technology basis. Now, a lot of the technology is taken from Star Trek, so that is the idea of warp, and some of the weapon systems do definitely come from the aspect of Star Trek, who are very focused on photon torpedoes and so forth, which are physical manifestation of weapons over weapons like phasers. Even though they do use phasers, phasers are the secondary weapon. Okay, let me just move to this. Now, as we're moving through, I'm actually going to explain a little bit more. Now, warp comes, as I was saying, from Star Trek. Now, within the Star Trek universe, they use the warp system. Now, warp is actually a very basic idea. It manipulates the gravitational fields by causing a push and a pull, causing space to contract and expand, making you travel wider distances through space in an instant. And the next set of technology which we do go through in this game is Stargate systems. Now, the Stargate is a very, very complicated system. It requires you to understand that there's what you call dimensional space, and that different dimensions can have different sizes and cross much larger regions, even though they are smaller, which is kind of complicated to understand. But basically, it's like a big ball, and everything inside it being so far apart when you're looking in three-dimensional space. But in two-dimensional space, it's just a small 2 millimeter line if you had to draw it across from one angle, and the other angle is 5 centimeters or something like that. But in actuality, if you're doing it in three-dimensional space, it's like 100 kilometers. But these are just multi-dimensions of three-dimensional space that move through something called subspace. Now, subspace is what is used to describe spaces that are sub to our actual space. They remove certain aspects of space-time, and they can move faster than warp because of that. That is where you get your Stargate system. Now, also part of all of this is the Star Wars universe, and that is being introduced in the form of warp scramblers, disruptors. Those are all pieces of technology used in the cartoons. Now, I'm not sure whether the influence came from Eve or from the Star Wars series, where they talk about pulling ships out of hyperdrive and tractor beams and so forth, Weber fires basically, and warp scramblers pulling you out of hyperspace. Those are the types of things that they talk about. And those are definitely references to one of the medians of sci fi that I'm talking about from the major three. They may be even influenced from other sources, and it may be even different sources that are being used here. I'm just not 100% familiar with. Now, the main system that we use for traveling around, the Stargates, is the exact name of the series, Stargate. Now, that was a direct reference to Stargate SG1, the Stargate movies, Stargate Atlantis. All of their technology is being used in this way. Now, one of the enemies from the Stargate universe is called the Ori. The Ori are a religious, fanatical fact that enslave humanity to improve their power because they are transcendent beings. Now, if it sounds very familiar to you in the fact that Ama is a religious faction who use slaves and have a lot of bad things to do with them, this is just one coincidence. The next thing that is also a major coincidence is their choice of weapon, energy based laser weapons. And there is exactly a reference between them and the Ori, making them almost identical and the same civilization. Now, throughout Stargate, there are multiple different enemies. One of them being a Goa'uld, who basically use a shield system, and it also is the same with the other factions within space. That is, Stargate and Starfleet both use shield systems that can deplete over time. Star Wars uses deflectors, which is basically your invulnerability fields, and they use speed and deflection basically to avert damage. Okay, moving on, they also have draining technology in Star Wars. I have seen it only used in one or two episodes where they just totally black out the system instantly using those types of systems. Now, moving on and further into all of these are the little additions of the shapes of ships and so forth. Now, within one of the shapes and one of the references of ships is the Kaldari sect. The Kaldari sect actually reminds me a lot of Star Wars Birds of Prey. Now, Birds of Prey come from the Klingon faction. They are very T like shaped vessels with a agile hunter like face on top of them. They weren't really practical for use, but if you look at it, that base system is really carried over into Kaldari. Both the MOAs and the Caracals are an example of it. Now, moving on, I did talk about Amar already, and I just spoke about Caldaria, but now Manmata would be the exact opposite of Amar. And the opposite of the Amar space allies would be a faction called um, Earth's, what was it called? Strategic Defense. Basically, it's the version of a defense unit in Stargate. And this is the main Earth forces. They use missiles and railguns on their ships, and later they adapted to using high burst energy weapons as their form of defense. Now, yes, it does sound very familiar. It may be totally different. There is no guarantees on anything that is being said. Moving on, another massive coincidence or a massive amount of factions that have similarities are the Galactic Corporation. The Galactic Corporation have a familiarity with Star Trek corporations. Their business minded strategies and their quick ploys and their dirty habits make them very similar to a creature called the Ferengi from Stargate in itself. It's not Stargate, Star Wars, sorry, not Star Trek. I'm sorry about that. It's so confusing referencing all of them all at once. Now, what there is to know about them is the Ferengi are a very greedy type of race in the overall basic behavior. And one of the ways in which they identify with people is they make profit. It is their base system. And Galantia are very similar to the Ferengi in a lot of aspects of their business motives. Now, beyond them, the other sectors that have similar natures to the Ferengi and Starfleet would also be Caldari. Now, as I said, some of their ships look very familiar to Klingon ships. They also have similarities to basic ship shapes from Star Trek. The use of drone boats is something which is very common with Stargate, not with Star Trek. Let's see, what was it that was very familiar between the two? Uh, the outward spiraling out from the center, yeah, that is very familiar. It does reminisce of the two franchises very well, but that wasn't what I was thinking of. Yes, they do remind me of the hive mind of the Borg. That is from Galante Space themselves. Their large vessel, the Myrmidon, makes gives me a very familiar aspect towards the Borg. Even though it may not be a cube, it is very, very rigid shaped, and it works off the idea of multiple ships working for a single individual's purpose. Now, some of the other ships don't really match up properly with Star Trek because they don't really have a very similar shape. But I did say that their philosophies and practices work out very similarly. Now, moving on beyond all of these, there's even more references in the game from pop culture. Example, the use of laser weapons, familiar with both Star Wars, Star Trek and Stargate. All three use laser and energy based weapons for enemies. Shields are also a common factor. Drive technologies are either hyperdrive, warp drive, or sublight. and they are used throughout all of the different factions. Now, that is something that is very common amongst them, and we do use a similar idea within our gameplay. We basically use sublight speed to make us move at hundreds of meters per second, and we use warp speed to move around within solar systems. Then we use hyperspace to travel between systems. Basically, they're following the basis of Star Trek, Stargate, and Star Wars at the same time. Now, moving on beyond all of these are other types of civilizations from those shows which have small impacts into the game. You may notice them from the mining of asteroid belts, because you do get a mining race within Star Trek, if I'm correct, and within Star Wars. Um, Cybernetic implants is something that reminisces with the Borg. You get it on some of your NPCs, and some of the players that you set up have metallic pieces on their faces, very reminiscent of the Borg. Okay, what else was there that was similar? It's quite hard to get it all in one go, but I'm still giving it a whirl. Uh, fleets are used in all of them as well, not something really all that unique. Different classes of ships are more reminiscent of Star Wars and Stargate than of Starfleet and Star Trek, because in Star Trek all of their ships do sound like they have different classes, but they just sub smaller versions of the bigger class ship, while in Star Trek and where in Stargate and Star Wars, different class vessels are absolutely different from their lower class counterparts. They have more advanced systems, more advanced weapons, they have different formations of power building, they can do many different things, and that is one of the bases of most of the game. Now, a lot of the missions will throw you into the ideas from these shows. Like for freedom is a very basic idea from Star Trek. They're always talking about freeing people. Divine trial is something from the Ori. There's so many references in this game, it's almost unbelievable. And those are just some of the impacts and places where you can see things coming into the game. Now, how does this help you in terms of gameplay? Well, it actually can help you a lot if you know how to use it. When people generally use an idea to build a base model, they tend to pull a little bit more from the original base model to make them suit what they are seeing in their head. So you might get to see more of those systems in play as we progress through the game. Examples will be, um, let's see, the larger ships. We still haven't gotten to them, but if you watch these shows, you're going to have an idea on what they're going to be able to do. Since they have such a massive similarity between Eve and those shows, the ships are going to have similar qualities when they reach that massive class. The battle cruisers, battleships, all of those massive class ships are going to have a reminiscent feel to things like star destroyers, to massive ships from Star Trek or Starfleet. Destiny literally looks like a Caldari ship, and it has a massive counterpart that's 700 meters long. That makes it quite a large ship. It's going to be, and we have these type of aspects being described to us. So you can expect things in a similar nature to come into the game. I'm not saying that they are definitely going to come in, but there is a way in which you can draw some um, expectation on what is to come in the future. Now, my number one reason for making this is I'm actually holding off making any major information videos at the moment, because I have to gather all information on my own, and it's a little bit more tedious than it previously was. When guys were helping me out and willing to feed me little bits of information and test out one or two things for me, it made my videos come out regularly, allowing me to do about 2 or 3 a day. But now, with the limited information I have, I can only really make one proper video a day, and I can speculate for two other videos. And a lot of people have um, announced their negativity towards it and are criticizing me for that decision. So I've decided to give a little bit more research into my videos. because there are quite a bit of mistakes coming out right now. And when I lost that whole mass of players, I used their stats to build up a nice stat. Right now, I can't even build up a stat on how accurate or how good my builds are. Okay, so that's going to be about it. Just a little bit of fun video. It's going to say Eve Echoes talking about the pop culture references. And I'm hoping that all of you are enjoying it and find the similarities. If you find any other similarities, leave it down in the comments. I definitely would enjoy watching it. And as Yoda would say, subscribe, you must. Yeah, I'm right. It's you must subscribe. So subscribe, you must would be a Yoda reference. Yeah, well, anyway, if that's the way the cookie crumbles, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Thank you all for watching. Have a good day.